Chapter 8 Issues of Guilt and Shame, Power and Control, and Identity. Guilt and shame. Guilt is another issue for adoptees. Actually, while guilt is often predominant for both birth and adoptive mothers, it is probably shame which is felt most by the adoptees. What is the difference between them? The easiest way to understand this is to think of the difference between doing and being. One may feel guilty for what one has done or caused, but shame for who one is. Shame is connected to an adoptee's belief that he or she is unlovable. They are ashamed of who they are. Guilt is not always inappropriate. In fact, it is often helpful in one's holding to one's moral code. If one hurts someone, for instance, it is appropriate to feel guilty about it, and hopefully refrain from doing it again. Guilt is inappropriate, however, when the person's feeling guilty has had no real control over whatever happened. Children feeling guilty about their parents' divorce, for example. Shame, on the other hand, is a completely useless feeling, because it means that a person is ashamed of the very core of his being. Adoptees are quite familiar with this feeling. It is the feeling of being the bad baby, the baby who wasn't good enough to keep. The adoptive parents' assurance that they were chosen and that they are special, that they truly love and want the child to no avail. Jeanette put it this way: "Oh yeah, my adoptive parents said that they loved me, but let's face it, who can really love a reject? Or, as Bill said it, I was a throwaway. Who's going to love me?" Oh my god, we had comments earlier on TikTok that were just this. It was like, well, you shouldn't go searching for your bio parents, or who would want to, what was it? Oh, well, we're not responsible for you guys being rejected. And, we're the ones that have to take you in anyway. It was really hurtful. Anyway, so, yeah, we get bullied all the freaking time on this, and we already feel this guilt. It sucks. Part of this feeling of shame has to do with the feeling of incompleteness, which follows the premature separation from the birth mother. Something is missing. There is a feeling that they are disabled or handicapped. They are not whole or wholesome. They are defective, impaired, fragmented. Often the search for the birth mother is an attempt to heal this defect, mend the wound, or perfect the imperfect. Biological children raised in the same home with an adopted brother or sister often feel the same way. Feel as if they are living with a handicapped person who needs 90% of the attention. They often wish that they themselves were handicapped, not only to gain some of the attention, but also because they feel guilty for not having been adopted. They have ambivalent feelings of compassion and anger about the intense feelings and outrageous behavior which are generated by the adoptee's anxiety, yet feel helpless to do anything about it. Parents also feel helpless because it seems that no matter what they do, it is wrong. It seems like a catch-22 situation, with no one being the winner. The cure seems to make it worse, and that's in quotes. The cure, quote unquote, seems to make the pain worse. The more the parents demonstrate affection, the higher the anxiety of the adoptee, and the more acting out they do. There's no way for others to convince adoptees they are wonderful, lovable, beautiful people. If they get gentle and steadfast love, constancy of availability from those who love them, which includes absolutely no threat of abandonment, they may begin to trust in the possibility of their own goodness. But the only sure way of adoptees to rid themselves of shame is for them to work it through for themselves. It is not enough for adoptees to gain acceptance from others. Ultimately, they must learn to love and accept themselves. Power or mastery and control. Adoptee as the victim. Closely related to guilt and shame is control. To be guilty of something means that one has or had some control over the situation. One could have done something differently. Yet, even though adoptees tend to feel intensely responsible for their own relinquishment, there is a paradoxical feeling of having been the victim. For sure, like this is something that, something that we definitely feel both victimized and feel guilty because we're at fault, but we're not at fault and we didn't have any control of the situation. I know it sounds weird, but that's literally what we go through on a day-to-day basis, and it sucks. Oh my goodness. Okay. This then implies a need for someone to blame. Adoptees facilitate back and forth between blaming themselves for not having been good enough to keep to having feeling of helplessness and undifferentiated anger for having been so manipulated. This ambivalence is sometimes misinterpreted by therapists when adoptees are in treatment and seen as an excuse for not taking responsibility for themselves. They are sometimes seen as using their adoptive status as a rationalization for conflicts which arise with parents making resolution as the conflict impossible. While it is true that seeing adoption as the only issue may cause parents and children to overlook some obvious interpersonal conflicts, it is important to keep in mind that adoptees are victims of manipulation of the gravest kind, the severing of their tie to the birth mother and their biological roots. The feeling of being a victim is not just a fantasy, but a reality. Being abandoned often leaves one with a permanent feeling of being at the mercy of others. The fact that the child does not consciously remember the substitution of mothers does not diminish the impact of that experience. In fact, the ability to consciously remember the experiences may make the impact even more devastating and perplexing. One adoptee said that the most important thing I ever told her was that feelings have memories. That statement validated a variety of emotions and beliefs. Kind of like Inside Out. Oh man, I should do if you guys don't, I have other channels, by the way. One is the Disney Pixar Connection, and I dive into Disney and Marvel and Star Wars and all that. But that would be a great thing to take. I really want to do this anyway for other movies, but to talk about certain movies and how it really brings into effect the lessons. So like Inside Out, it explains our emotions, but also that each memory has an associated of actually a mix of emotions. But there's going to be one main one that you remember with it. Yeah. All right. Anyway, the sources of which could not trace, but which were very strong and persistent. One such belief was that of being a victim. About she often felt guilty. Understanding the possible source of her sense of being a victim may have been the first step toward her being able to feel more in control of her life and less a victim. Having been manipulated at the beginning of their lives makes some adoptees manipulative and controlling. Man, I hope I don't feel like I hope I don't come off like that. I know I have control problems. I know that for myself. But I hope I don't feel like I'm manipulating. I hope my friends and family don't think that I'm being manipulative. And like I'm trying to hone in on my control issues. It's a problem. I recognize it as a big problem. It's always been a problem for me, but that's something that I've been trying to work out. Man, now this bugs the heck out of me. Families of acting out adoptees will know what I'm talking about. There seems to be an almost desperate need to be in control at all times. Some adoptees control situations by becoming isolated and detached. Ooh, yes, I do. Yes, I do. While others are more overt in their controlling mechanisms. In the first case, there seems to be a need to avoid being in a situation, again, which might trigger rejection and possible abandonment. While in others, there seems to be a need to relieve anxiety by getting the inevitable abandonment over with. In both cases, the adoptee feels like a victim desperately trying to gain control over their situation. Yeah, when I feel like the need to detach and isolate, I tend to want to numb out really bad, like just not feel for a while. Actually, I was talking about this the other day with some friends, fellow adoptees, and I'm like, I just need to feel numb right now because I can't control situations, right? And there's things that bother me, and it just seems like no matter what I choose and how to handle the situation, it wouldn't make it better, it wouldn't make it go away. Um, and it just continues to trigger, right? And so it's hard. It's hard to deal with. Um, it's hard to recognize it. And it's hard to come to terms with you cannot be in control of everything. You obviously can't control people. They have their own motives and feelings and experiences, and all of that is valid. Does it suck for us as an adoptee? Yes. Okay. Anyway, continuing on. Gotta find where we left off. Okay, there we go. Parents and clinicians should not dismiss the feeling of victimization on the part of the adoptee as a rationalization and a means of avoiding the resolution of conflicts with their parents. They should instead first acknowledge the child's feelings, then go on to the interpersonal problem. Lashing out against the adoptive parents is a way for the adoptee to try to externalize their inner shame. I don't know why I was always so angry at my parents. When I think about it, they never did anything to make me angry. It was as if I was trying to rid myself of something inside me, and the only way I could do it was to put it on them. That doesn't make any sense, does it? Said Andrew. Yes, it makes sense in the light of his experience. Yet, at the same time, it is destructive to the relationship because the parents also feel victimized. In working with the adoptive families, it seems to be tremendously helpful for the adoptive parents to understand the source of the child's anger, because instead of becoming defensive, they can acknowledge feelings. Okay. Life isn't fair. Feeling like a victim sometimes has a paralyzing effect on an adoptee because even though they try to control their environment, they still don't feel as if they are in control of their life. Their striving to be complete was disrupted by something taking over their life and altering it forever. This feels unnatural and may stymie the natural continuity of devel- oh my god, Dele- developmental, I don't know why I can't say that word today, tasks such as learning the relationship between cause and effect, or more personally, that their actions have consequences for which the person is responsible, while the rest of the family may feel as if the adoptee, if he is or if they are the acting out type, is controlling the whole family, taking up everyone's space, and requiring 90% of the attention. The adoptee themselves may feel completely at all at the mercy of the circumstances beyond their control. They may have feelings that life isn't fair or that they really can't help what they're doing. Adoptees often have poor frustration tolerance or impulse control. This means that the slightest thing, such as difficulty in trying their shoes or finding an object, may make them inappropriately angry and react. It also means that the lack of inner brakes or impulses that might normally be expected for their age group. In other words, it is easier for them to control the rest of the family than it is for them to control themselves. One way that they do this is by making the whole family give in to their behavior in order to avoid conflict over mundane things. It is difficult for them to take responsibility for themselves, especially as children and adolescents. It isn't a question of mind over matter. Many parents suspect, as many parents suspect, adoptees really don't feel as if they have any control in their lives. They do feel like victims, so they react angrily to that feeling of helplessness. If they are compliant, willing, walking on eggshells type, see, I'm a mix. I know I'm a mix. I used to be more of the compliant walking on eggshell types. Like, that's what I can remember as a child. And sometimes I feel like it now. But I've definitely been more reactive in the last decade than anything. Anyway. However, they may appear to be overly responsible, rather than it being due to a healthy integration of the relationship between cause and effect in the normal sense. However, this overly responsible behavior may be a response to anxiety. It may be due to the feeling that the original cause of their abandonment was that they were defective. So in the effective that they now have to be perfect. As Rick said, I knew I had to be a better person than the one who was given away. As adults, adoptees sometimes find themselves to be perennial students, never quite figuring out what they want to do in life. Ooh, that hurts. Often, even the idea of applying for a job or going for interviews feel like dread. As has been mentioned before, the fear of rejection paralyzes them, leaving them again feeling like a failure. One mother said, Alan used to tell us constantly that he couldn't wait until he was 18 so he could move out. And now he's 23 and he's still here. He lies in bed until noon, always promising to go out and look for a job. What can we do? We don't want him to feel like we're abandoning him. This is indeed a dilemma for families who are actually aware of the delicate balance between abandonment and their need to push their children to grow up and take responsibility. The adoptee will often facilitate in their response to their parents by either telling them that they can't run their life or accusing them of not caring. Children who do leave home often do so at the defense against being kicked out, rather than an appropriate response to the current stage of their developmental process. Even for those who make a smooth transition out of their families, there's often a feeling that something was left undone. Sure, I went away to college, just like my friends, but there was always this nagging feeling that I forgot something, that I'd left something unfinished. I couldn't really describe it, but it just feels incomplete, you know? Like forgetting to brush your teeth before going to bed. What's stronger than that? I don't know. Before one can truly separate, one must one must first connect. And I think for many adoptees, the inability to really bond with their adoptive mother leaves them feeling as if they are not yet ready to separate. And if they are not ready to separate, how can they be autonomous, independent adult beings? Being adopted sometimes makes an adoptee feel as if they are perpetually a child. As B.J. Lifton says, who has ever heard of an adopted adult? There actually are, but okay. The thing is, there are adults who are adopted, um, there are people who are adopted as adults because they asked to be. There's even a whole show about it now on A&E. May or may not cover it. I don't know. I kind of have some plans for it, but feeling iffy and icky about it. However, when we talk about adoptees, we don't say adopt. So when we say adoptees, we are referencing both the children that are adopted as well as the adults that had been adopted, right? We're still adoptees. However, when we talk about the adopted child, people often forget that they grow up to become adults. And so, yeah, we get treated as children, but then we get looked at as adults, and they're like, why do you feel this way? Why do you act this way? And it's very frustrating. The adoptee didn't choose the circumstances of their life, and they feel as if they are powerless over them, even as an adult. Parents often hear the children saying, "It isn't my fault. I couldn't help it," or "I didn't do it," even in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary. And although it may be evident to the parent that the child was responsible for what happened, the child probably actually feels as if they were out of their control. In the last part of this book, I will have some suggestions for adoptive parents to facilitate a balance between the security of necessary boundaries and a child's having some sense of control in their life. Identity. Adolescence is a difficult time in the lives of parents and their children, whether adopted or not, but it seems especially difficult for those children who have no sense of their history. During adolescence, when everyone is searching for their own identity, it becomes more difficult for the adoptee to deny the fact that they have no long-term history with the people for whom they have been raised by. Not only do they find it difficult to identify their own personal history with that of their family, but they experiences a great deal of conflict around the idea of searching for that personal history. For the hitherto, I don't know, I said that wrong, compliant adoptee, this may be the first time they become aware of their deep feelings about their relinquishment and adoption. The lack of personal history is a handicap for the adoptee because of the importance of knowing one's past before planning for the future. In an attempt to do this, some adoptees tend to identify with their perception of the birth parents, especially the mother, who is sometimes perceived as young and promiscuous, or a member of royalty. The idea that she was probably an ordinary, vulnerable, and confused person, a great deal like the adoptee themselves, is not usually one of those fantasies they have about their birth mother. Because of the dearth of information about their own history, the adoptee often has a more stressful adolescence than the non-adopted counterpart. The profound separation of the biological sense of themselves and the inability to identify with either of their adoptive parents may prompt some adoptees to act out destructively during adolescence, even if they had previously been compliant. This often astonishes their adoptive parents, who had thought that their child had made a good adjustment. The parents often feel betrayed by their previously docile child and unable to cope with the situation. Many adoptees and their parents end up feeling rejected and hurt, with the children often leaving home prematurely. One parent explained, "Dottie was always such a loving daughter. I thought we had a wonderful relationship. Now that she had now she's just disappeared. Why is she doing this to us? Was she just acting out all those years? I feel so hurt, angry, and betrayed. But I'd give anything if she'd just come back. I miss her so much." Dottie's sister had been the acting out child, so until adolescence, Dottie had been compliant and acquiescent. Then, with her sister out of the picture, she began to act out her own pain, which she took her parents completely by surprise. This is a story I have heard many times. The reasons vary for leaving home prematurely. Some adoptees leave as a result of having been kicked out by parents, unable to cope with the rebellion, which often becomes intolerable. The adoptees themselves have some sense of outrageousness of their behavior, yet they seem unable to stop themselves. Too often misguided clinicians advise the parents to send the children to or the child to an adolescent treatment center or special school. That's very true. They're completely unaware of the significance this solution has on the child, whereas in some cases this may be the last resort and the only thing to do. On the psychological level, it only reinforces and exasperates the abandonment issue for adoptees. These institutions rarely address abandonment issues in a manner which is healing to the adoptee. Many adoptees, in anticipation of being kicked out of the home, leave, rejecting their parents before their parents have a chance to reject them. Ron said, "I always had this feeling of impending doom at home. Nothing was ever said, but I felt like they were going to kick me out. When I was 16, I left home to live with a girlfriend, but then I kept going back, then leaving again. I finally left for the last time at 19. My parents and I talked to each other, but we aren't really close, and I don't know why." Other adoptees leave because they no longer want to do what these parents Other adoptees leave because they no longer want to do what these parents, to whom they are not really related, want them to do. "They don't know me. They don't understand me. They aren't really my parents. They were always trying to control me, like they thought I was going to do something terrible or something. I just had to get out." Yeah, so in a lot of times, it's because the adoptive parents are alienating or demonizing the first parents. And so they'll say things like, "Oh, you don't want to turn out like so and so, do you?" And that's really harmful because we're struggling with our identity. But on top of that, like, you shouldn't demonize if you wouldn't demonize your co-parent, why would you demonize the first parent? You know what I'm saying? Like, there's a lot to it. Anywho, in all of these cases, the resulting alienation is felt by both child and parents and is difficult to heal, not impossible, however, as I will discuss later. There are some adoptees who deny being curious about their origins. This is seen as by some professionals as an attempt to avoid upsetting the adoptive parents who want to maintain the illusion of a natural family. Some adoptive parents have a need to deny the adoption, or if not the adoption, the effect of the adoption on their children. Yet, the fantasy of being a natural family is constantly being undermined by the absence of any biological relationship, such as physical features, interests, talents, or personality traits. "I never looked like anyone in my family. I've always wanted to meet someone who looked like me," Alice explained. Many adolescent pregnancies are attempts by adoptees to have someone biologically connected to them. "Someone who looks like me." Ooh, that's a call out. That's a call out for me. So yeah, I wanted to have children at a young age. I felt this, like, not just this biological need to have someone that is my own, of my own family, my own flesh and blood. And I am a parent. I am a mother to currently a 9-year old. Um, and I will tell you that I remember going through that. Like, I need to have a baby young. I need to have a child. And now that I'm older, I'm like, wow, like, I wish I had waited. Like, I wish I had done things differently. That's not to say I don't love my kid. I absolutely adore him. But it's just when you're young, you're looking at things from a different perspective. Now that I'm going through all this adoption, trying to heal my adoption trauma more so than anything and all that, it's very tough to put to words that I don't want him to feel any of the things that I feel. And obviously he won't have exactly the same trauma as me, thank God, but at the same time, this is an effect that will hurt generations after us. And so, like, I'm hearing other people's stories where they're telling me, like, their parent is adopted or their grandparent is adopted, and they see these traumas, they see these effects, and it's being passed down, and it's a problem. It's a generational problem. Anyway, the loss of the thread of family continuity, a deep identification with their ancestors whose genes are stamped into every cell of their body, contributes to the sense of insecurity felt by the adoptee. No matter how competent and loving the adoptive mother and or father, the child shares no genetic history with them. They are deprived, so the child is deprived of the primitive relationship with the mother with whom he did share that history, or they shared that history. Adoptees are sometimes preoccupied with existential concerns, being disconnected from their genetic heritage and randomly placed in another milieu causes them to lose any sense of rightness of things. Rather, their feelings rather they feel that life is purposeless, chaotic, and irrational without order or meaning. This causes difficulties in their spiritual life and poses problems in making significant choices, such as career or a partner in life. The wish to search for biological parents becomes a means by which they may attempt to end the chaos, alienation, and isolation which result from the break in their genealogical history. Often, the death of an adoptive parent or the birth of their own biological child will bring on a deeper sense of genealogical bewilderment and a wish to search for birth parents. So, yeah, I told you guys that I'm a parent of 9 years, but when I was pregnant with him, I was already searching, but I felt like this desperate need to find out more information. I felt this desperate need to really, like, find my birth mom. Um, and I did. That was actually when I connected with her. I was pregnant with her. And then it wasn't until pretty recently that I found and reached out to my birth father. Again, I have no word from him still, so who knows what's going to happen with that. But um there's just stuff about it, like there's a lot of complex emotions, but we don't have a lot of the history we need to have for our own children. The search for identity, which commonly takes place during adolescence and early adulthood, is a time of conflict and dissent for most parents and their children. For adoptees, however, there is the added complication of not having any genealogical connection to the people who reared them. Even if they want to identify with their adoptive parents, the personality traits which they inherited from their birth parents may make this very difficult. One clinician put it this way: adoptees have a Swiss cheese identity. There are lots of holes in it. When physical appearance, personality, ethnicity, or culture are also different, which each of these aspects makes identity with the adoptive parents that much more difficult. The lack of personal identity precludes having a sense of belonging to the greater society. The question becomes, on a more global scale, Where do I fit in? One adoptee was telling me about a Star Trek episode, or 2 episodes, in which a child is born to people from another planet. The child's mother dies and the father returns to his native planet, leaving the child behind on Earth, where he doesn't feel as if he fits in because he is an alien. In the second episode, when they do not return to his native planet, he doesn't feel as if he fits in there either. That describes the feeling of many adoptees. Even after they found their birth parents, they do not fit in with their adoptive families with whom they share few personality traits, nor do they fit in with their birth families whom they have been living with in an entirely different environment. A great deal of understanding from everyone concerned is needed to help heal the feeling of alienation. In my own personal experience with my daughter, one of the most wonderful aspects of having her in my life, besides just the fact of her being, is that she drew me out of complacency. I was one of those adoptive parents who didn't believe I needed therapy. After all, I was a very functional and effective in all my areas of life, until I met failure in dealing with my daughter's pain. What I discovered about myself is that I was operating on only about 2 or 3 of my 8 cylinders. Whole aspects of my personality were hidden and unused, because I believe that we all have suffered nicks to the soul, as one of my psych professors called them. I also believe that adoptive parents need to address their own issues in trying to help their children. What I discovered were many facets of my personality, which might have been undiscovered had Giselle not forced me to take a look at myself. We are actually more alike than we were when she was a child, not because she became like me, but because I allowed the more extroverted parts of my own personality to blossom. I lost my place. As a result of being so closely involved with her. My therapy helped, of course, because it allowed me to feel more at home with myself, less narrow in my outlook. If adoptive parents are bogged down by their own inflexible worldview and need a shot in the arm, paying attention to the true personality of their child may give them that boost into new dimensions of their own personalities. I would urge adoptive parents to foster the true personalities of their children, which is different from behavior caused by pain, so that they too may become open to new possibilities, less restricted and inflexible. It can be like opening a door to a brand new world. So here's the summary that Nancy wrote. The primary or core issues for adoptees are abandonment and loss. From those two issues of the issues of rejection, trust, intimacy, loyalty, guilt, and shame, power and control, and identity emanate. These issues are intertwined and fluid for most adoptees, yet are probably present even in those who seem well adjusted. Part of the problem is getting through the denial in both adoptees and their parents about the differences between adoptive and so-called natural families. The first step for all triad members is to assess the level of awareness they have about adoption issues. In other words, the myths and stereotypes versus reality. None of these issues can be addressed successfully unless they are also addressed honestly. The depth of the pain and the many issues caused by that pain are not easy to face, but for healing to begin doing so is essential. Parents, if they are honest in their perceptions about their child, can, with the help from a professional, be tremendously effective in facilitating healing in their child. And so, starting with the next chapter, we will be talking about healing. I hope you all have a great day, and I will be working on chapter 9. So let's get to it.